Hi everyone, welcome to the third section of CLO basic training, which covers how to express garment details such as folded collars, tucks and pleats, elastic, and downfill. This first video will explain how to fold things. We'll go over fold angles, how to create a simple pleat, and the fold arrangement tool. You can follow along by downloading the practice files from the closet link in the video description below. Alright, so once you have your files downloaded, let's open number 1, fold angles. And you're going to get this rectangular pattern piece with a bunch of internal lines on it. We're going to create a accordion fold with this, and I'll explain the basic rules of folding and what you'll actually have to know in order to get started. And the first thing is you need an internal line in order to fold anything. So if I click on this internal line right now, I'm going to see that in my property editor, I have a bunch of fold properties. If you don't have internal lines, like over here, for example, these are baselines, they're blue, and when I click on them, I actually can't select them. They're common if you are using your own patterns and you have some reference lines or something, or if you import a pattern from elsewhere and there's like a fold marking, but you can't actually click on it. You can use your trace tool at that point to select these lines. I'm going to hold down Shift to select both, and then you can hit your Enter key on your keyboard in order to activate them. So now they are internal lines, they're red, and you can click on them. Okay, so the fold properties, you have fold strength, fold angle, and fold rendering. Fold strength is how much pressure you actually need in order to fold your pattern piece. This is determined by your fabric. So for example, if you have a really thick or dense leather or something, the fold may not look as great or as crisp if your fold strength is low. Generally 5 is okay, I just leave it on 5, but this may take some trial and error for you to get a great amount for the fabric that you're using. Fold angle is the angle of the fold. So if you remember from basic geometry class, you have your circle, which is 360 degrees, and then your plane, which is your pattern piece, is 180 degrees. So all of your internal lines will actually be at 180 degrees to start, and then when you increase or decrease the fold angle, you'll get different folds. If I turn on simulation right now and change my fold angle to under 180, it's going to fold back, and you can see that angle is less than 180 degrees. Then if I move it forwards, I'm going to increase the angle by above 180 degrees. But you don't actually have to remember this as much. You just have to know 0, 180, and 360, and we'll create our fold. So I'm going to go ahead and just reset this. And I want my angles to be opposite of each other, so I'm going to select every other line with my transform pattern tool, holding down Shift to grab all of them at once. If you notice right now, my fold angle is in red. This is because I had just changed a fold angle, that last line. If you see that any of your properties are in red, it just means that you've selected a bunch of things and they all don't have the same value. So not all of these are 180 degrees. If I can still enter in a number right now and change it if I want. I'm going to change all of these to be 0. And then I'm going to select the other lines that I didn't grab before and change them to be 360. So those are opposite angles. And I'm going to do one more step before I actually simulate. I'm going to strengthen my pattern piece. If I right click on any pattern piece in CLO, I can find the strengthen property. Strengthening is just like a temporary starching. It'll turn your pattern piece orange so you know it's strengthened. And it gives it a bit more structure as I'm folding so that my pattern pieces don't collide and they eventually settle and actually look crispy and nice. When I turn simulation on right now, my pattern will jump together and it'll be a cool accordion. Once I've finished my fold and it's settled, I can right click and unstrengthen so that everything is relaxed. Just to touch on the last couple of fold properties, If you look at your pattern piece now, you'll notice that some of your lines are super bright red and the others are a cool blue. This is an indication of what the angles are that you've changed your lines to. The red means that the line is less than 180 degrees, and the blue means that the line is above 180 degrees. So normally 0 or 360. This is just a good way for you to keep track of what lines have folds applied to them and what lines don't. And then the last fold property is fold rendering. This just means, do you want to see your internal line or no? And if you check off, your fold area will still be folded, but the line won't be crisp and it'll just look rolled. So if I uncheck this, you'll notice that like it's starting to smooth it out a bit. If I hide my internal lines in my baselines, you'll see that this is supposed to be smoothed out. I'm at a pretty high particle distance, so it doesn't look that great right now, but if I go down to 5 and simulate, this is a smoothed edge, and then this with my folds rendering on is super pointy. And depending on how realistic you want your patterns to be, how, like what kind of material you're using, you may decide to have the fold rendering on or off. It's up to you. And that's basic accordion pleat. So the next step is we're gonna use our fold angle and fold properties in order to do a collar and create back pleats on a button-down shirt. I'm gonna go ahead and open 2 women's button-down in the folds and pleats lesson folder, and we're going to live in this file for the rest of the lesson. In this one we're going to fold down the collar, fold up the cuffs, and also finish the back pleats. And I'm going to start with the cuffs and the collar because those are technically the easiest. Like I said before, sometimes you get patterns and you don't actually have an internal line to fold, but you need one. You have this reference line or baseline. I'm just going to trace it out with the trace tool. If you double click on this line, it will select both sides for you. And then I'm going to hit enter on my keyboard. Based on the last project file, you'll probably want to select the line and change the fold angle, but it's actually not going to work on most cuffs and collars just because it's already sewn onto your garment, and when I do try to change the angle, it's not strong enough to fold down the entire pattern piece. That's okay. There's a tool. I'm going to change this back first. There's a tool that will actually help you fold down your collar. It's called the fold arrangement tool, and it works on any internal line. So once I click on it, I can select my internal line, click on that, and then a gizmo pops up, and I can use these little handles to actually move my collar and fold it back. So the easiest way of doing this would actually be to rotate so you can see the full circle of your gizmo, and then you can go ahead and just move it. I wouldn't go too far in. Once you start to see the bottom or your collar stand kind of bleed in, that's when you know you've gone too far. And it's okay to like not go down all the way. You're just kind of influencing the direction that the collar is going to go in. And like with the other project file, I do want to right click and strengthen this. It helps me make sure that this area doesn't become a problem or try to like flip back up once I hit simulate. So now I'm going to simulate it. And it should lay down nice and flat. Once I'm good, I can right click and unstrengthen. And you're gonna notice that your collar still doesn't look that great. It's really, really crisp here and may look a little blocky. If you remember from one of the first lessons about particle distance, this is a good area where having a low particle distance will make your car look much nicer. So if you notice, it's pretty jagged right here. If I click on my pattern piece right now and go to my particle distance in my property editor, I just change it down to 5. My color is going to smooth itself out and look much more realistic. And I'm just going to simulate to update this change. Cool. If you want a really, really ironed down crisp collar, you can leave this internal line the way it is. If you're looking for more of a rolled collar look, you can turn off your fold rendering and your collar will roll out. It'll be as if that internal line doesn't exist. Or you can just delete the line if you don't need to do anything else with this collar and you're done editing it. And then once I simulate, you'll see that my collar is rolled out nicer and is smoother. If you're still getting some of this jaggedness, this is actually because of your mesh. Because we're automatically in a triangular mesh, the collar won't actually lay down super nice and flat. You can change this if you select your collar in your property editor under miscellaneous. You can change your mesh type to be quad. This will convert your triangle mesh into a quad mesh, and when you simulate, you'll have a much nicer roll. And that's just because triangles are pointy and quads are smooth. So you can kind of see it a bit over here. Cool. You can do the same for your cuffs right now. I'm just going to use my fold arrangement tool, click on them. I can do both before I simulate. And then just select both and strengthen them before I simulate. Sometimes you do run into some issues. The good thing with strengthening on is you can easily just pull at it to fix it without ruining the rest of your patterns. And then I'm gonna right click and unstrengthen to finish. I can choose to keep my internal lines or not, but I can immediately change it to be 5 particle distance. If you are working on other edits or your file's getting pretty huge, you can leave your patterns to be on a higher particle distance, but just for the sake of showing the high quality finished look, I'm going to change it down. So that looks pretty good to me. If I wanted to, I could also change my sleeves to be quad mesh and they'll look much nicer. Moving on to our back, we're going to learn how to do pleats or tucks and following the markings on this pattern piece. I have my pattern split up into symmetric parts just so I can show on one side and they'll like automatically match the other side for me. But if you didn't have a symmetric pattern, you'd have to do this on both sides. So I know my pleat is going to fold to the left, but first I need to trace out these internal lines. And we can talk about right now when you would use the fold arrangement tool and when you don't. For tucks and pleats, I generally wouldn't use the fold arrangement tool just because it's moving my entire pattern piece. So if I use my fold arrangement tool right now and try to click on this and fold it, I'm going to definitely run into some collision issues because my entire pattern piece is trying to merge inside my avatar, and then I won't even be able to select the other lines I need to fold. So I'm going to undo that. So I would suggest sewing everything else down first so that you have a good arrangement for your pleat sewing. So my whole back piece is sewn except for this section, and that's fine because I kind of have it like my structure already down. I'm going to immediately select both of my pattern pieces and strengthen them, and then just simulate so that they stiff up and I can see both of my pleated areas. Then I'm going to select first my first line. Usually you'll have 3 lines. The first one is the direction of the pleat, and then the second one is the inside of the pleat, and you'll have similar markings as to my pattern. The first one, depending on what direction you want the pleat to go, the easiest way of doing this is just to turn simulation on and change the fold angle on and like look on the screen of what direction you want the pleat to go in. So it looks like this is going in, so I actually want it to be at 0 so that the pleat will go out and fold to the left. I'm going to select the inside line now, and this one was 0. I want the opposite of that, which is 360, so I know my other line has to be 360. And when I change it, my pleat is going the direction that I want it to. So that's the logic of your tucks or your pleats. It's always one line will be either 0 or 360, and then the other line will be the opposite number. This last line you don't really need. It's just an indication of where the pleat will meet, and you'll keep it at 180 degrees. So once I've folded it, I can now sew it down. And sewing is you're gonna start at the angle and then sew out, and you're gonna just sew the different sides of the angle to each other. And I'm used to doing it in 2D, but if you wanted to, you can also sew in the 3D window. But so this is the line where my pleat is, and this is the inside of the angle. I'm going to click and sew out with my free sewing tool, and then click again to sew out on the other side. And that creates my first sewing relationship. And again, I need to sew the second part of my pleat to the pattern. I'm going to start on the inside corner, sew out, and start in the inside corner and sew out. And I'm going to turn simulation on to see if my sewing is correct, which it should be. And then the last thing about pleat sewing is that you want to, I'm going to use my edit sewing tool to select my sewing lines. You want your sewing line type to be turned. If you remember from the sewing videos, that if you have pattern pieces on top of each other and sewn together, it's better to turn the sewing type to turned. This just means that they're not going to be ironed out flat like a side seam would be, but they're going to be turned out like a pocket, for example. For this instance, these pleats, all these different layers are on top of each other, sewed together, so I do want it to be turned just so that I can decrease that puffiness that will happen. And it's like a small thing, but it does make a difference once you go into high res. Alright, and now I'm going to right click and unstrengthen, and there's my pleat. I can now sew this entire thing to the yoke. Cool. There we go. And if you decide you don't need these lines anymore, you can always turn the fold rendering off or delete them. Sometimes I like to just decrease the length of the inner fold just so I don't see that little line. But if you want a really soft fold or a soft tuck, you can always just delete these as well. So now that we've done it the manual way, I'm going to explain the pleat sewing and pleats fold tools, which are a more automatic way of doing it, but it's better to understand the logic of the angles and why one is 360, one is 0, etc. before you actually use these tools. These are super helpful for if you're trying to do multiple tucks or like a pleated skirt or something, and you have a lot of internal lines to deal with, but generally you only have one or two, and it's pretty easy to manually change the fold angle. But if we want to learn how to use these tools, we can. I'm going to just delete my pleat sewing, and I'm going to change my internal line angles back to 180. We're just going to start from the beginning. You can open up your file again if you want, instead of doing it this way. Let's just start fresh. And I have to delete the sewing as well. Okay. And I'm going to strengthen this again, just so everything is flat and nicely laid out for me. So the pleat fold tool and the pleat sewing tool, the pleats fold tool will automatically assign different fold angles to all of your internal lines. And that's cool because you don't have to select each line separately and do it. To use it, you just click on it and you're gonna select the lines you're gonna use, and then you're gonna go in a direction that you want to fold. So to select your lines, I'm gonna first click on one side of all of the lines, so on the right side, and then you get this line, this arrow, and you're gonna cross over all of your internal lines and then double click on the other side. A pleats fold box will appear that will ask you if you want knife pleats, box pleats, or accordion pleats. And in this video, we're just doing basic pleating, so we're not going to go into box pleats, but this would be a knife pleat. And the number of internal lines per pleat, this just means, does your pattern have just the 2 lines as markings, or do you have the 3 lines, including the one that you don't use, which is the 180 degrees flat line? And since I have 3 lines, I'm going to select 3, and you'll notice that my first line will turn red, my second one will turn blue, and my last one is the normal internal line color. Like I said before, I know this is correct because if it's a bright red line, that means my angle is less than 180 degrees, and if it's a blue line, then my angle is over 180 degrees. I'm going to hit OK and just simulate to see if this is correct, and it is. So that got us to where we were before when we were manually changing the fold angles, but in order to use this tool, you do have to understand why each fold angle value is the way it is and how to do it manually first. So that's why I explained it the other way. Now we're gonna do our sewing, and the pleat sewing tool is the more complicated tool. It automatically sews 1 segment to 3 segments. If you notice, your pleat is made out of 3 segments. I'm gonna use my edit pattern tool to click on it. So 1, 2, 3. You should have a point separating each segment where the lines are intersecting. If you don't have a point there, you can select the end of your line and choose extend/trim and add point to pattern outline so that it creates your different segments. The tool isn't smart enough to automatically group your pleat together unless you separate it into these segments. Same with the above. It'll automatically sew. So for example, if I sew, click end, then click at the end, and then I click here, it's grouping those 3 segments to 1, but it's not smart enough to know how, like, wide that first section should be. So you do have to split up your lines into segments that are equal. To do that, I want to measure how big my pleat actually is. I'm going to use my edit pattern tool and just click on it and attach to my cursor, and on the line is how long it is. It's 0.492. So up here, I'm going to create a point that is 0.492 away from the center. So to do that, I'll right click on this, hit split. I'm going to choose split into 2 lines, and this is the new segment. So I will say that it's 0.492. And I'll do that for the other side as well. All right, now that my segment is split up and equal to my finished pleat size, I'm going to click on my pleat sewing tool. I'm going to click here to start and then click here to end this first section of my sewing relationship. And if I click here to start, it groups those 3 pleats together, or those 3 segments together into one pleat. And it will do the sewing that we did manually before. So if I use my edit sewing tool now and click on these sewing relationships, all of them have been turned for me already, and they're sewn to each other and to this top section. You do still have to do this section and sew it on its own. So I can just quickly do that. All right, and that's our pleat. So in the future, we will be creating tips and tricks videos talking more about pleats and the pleats fold tool. We'll probably create a video talking about how to create a full pleated skirt and other cool things, but for now, this is enough to get you guys started. If you'd like more practice, in the CLO set files, there are 2 practice files. There's a men's button down with an added cuff pleat that would be cool to create, and then a woman's collared dress where you can figure out how to sew the tucks onto her bodice. And that's it. So good luck, and if you have any questions or comments, please write them below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.